Alrighty, so a little bit about myself is I grew up in Western Colorado. I grew up on a ranch over here, and then I went to CSU. Like Corey said, I got my undergrad and my master's at CSU, moved away. My trade was really hospitality, so I went and managed a restaurant in Aspen for numerous years, and then I got the chance to move back to Western Colorado and start to raise my family here. So here's me when I was little. I hope you guys all enjoy the picture. That is when my love of food started, apparently at a very young age. Coming from an Italian family and living on a ranch, you know, I was born to love food, I think. You know, and I want to carry that through to my family and to my community. This is actually my nephew. He's getting to know one of the cattle or one of the bulls at our farm. And that's my husband and son and I. We were up hiking over by Ridgeway on Wetterhorn Mountain. So, you know, I really enjoy it, but most of all, you know, I enjoy teaching people about where their food comes from and then how to use it to live a healthy life. I think it's really important that people understand where their food comes from so that they can make informed decisions. And we'll get into that more today as we talk about preserving and some of the considerations that you can make when getting ready to preserve some food. Any questions so far? Okay. In the chat, Andrew's going to post a link to it's an app that it's a polling app that I'd like you to fill in. It's about where you're from and then one word describing why you were here today. So if you guys can go ahead and go to that, and then we will also use that website in a little bit to answer another question. But I just want everyone to see where we're all from and what our goal is today. All right, so you guys can all see. Ooh, salsa, Michigan. Tomatoes, to learn, farming, never canned. Okay. Montrose, canning, perfect. To learn, farming, green beans. Ooh, that's popular right now. So overwhelmingly, it looks like Fort Collins is one of the largest ones. Arvada, general interest, correct technique from Aurora. Okay, we can do that today. All right, Anchorage, very cool. Someone is just curious. All right, awesome. Well, let's go ahead and get started, and we'll jump right in today. So today we are going to start with some considerations. Well, we're going to start with history and basics of canning, then jump into some considerations you should have before learning how to preserve or jumping into preserving in general. And then we'll talk about canning, and in particular water bath canning, because if you haven't canned before, I think that's a great place for you to start. I think it takes the fear factor away of canning, and you learn the proper technique before jumping into something that's more advanced. Okay. So some of the basics, you know, we have really been preserving across all of our cultures and time periods for a very, very long time. We have seen man preserve seal meat by freezing it. We have seen drying corn or drying a variety of fruits and vegetables as a way of preserving it. As time has gone on, we have seen the use of root cellars to maintain a proper temperature control to store things like potatoes and onions for a lot longer. And then we get to modern day where we have practices such as freezing that we can now utilize, whereas they didn't have that before. So overall, you know, the way we preserve has changed, but the basic principles of preservation has really remained the same. What we want to avoid and what we, you know, preserving safe food that you can use all year round to have a balanced diet is really what we are after. Everyone wants to take the fruits and vegetables or food in general from times of the year when it's abundant and save it for times of the year when it's not as abundant. So some of the ways that we you know, preserve food is that we want to prevent spoilage. So spoilage begins as soon as food is harvested or slaughtered. Spoilage can be caused by microorganisms, physical damage, or water loss or chemical changes due to enzymes. If I get going too fast, someone please let me know. But spoilage microorganisms that we're worried about are really mold, yeast, and bacteria. They can be found in the air, soil, on people or animals, and on a variety of surfaces. When we look at mold, we really see fuzzy growth on foods like this orange over here. It grows in high and low acidic foods and also in drier conditions. Yeast grow in high and low acid foods as well, and they can actually cause foods to ferment. So you'll get that fermented, not good smell to it, which is one of the ways you can tell it's a yeast. Yeast can also be destroyed at temperatures between 140 and 180 degrees. And then we get to bacteria. Bacteria typically make their food slimy, soft, or smelly. They can cause infections or produce toxins, and some even form spores. Bacteria can be destroyed by heat, but spores will take a higher level of heat to be destroyed. And bacteria like a variety of growing conditions and environments. So spoilage also occurs through physical damages, such as bruising or punctures, or water loss and wilting. Those are all physical damages that are undesirable and can lead to spoilage. Enzymes can also lead to spoilage. Most enzymes are naturally found in foods that help them grow and mature. And if they're not inactivated, they can continue to work after your food is harvested. So we particularly see this when we get into freezing and some drying, but when blanching can deactivate these enzymes. So it's a really important step if you guys are getting into other types of preservation that we're not talking about today. Some of the methods that we've seen historically and are currently using today are drying, freezing, canning, and fermenting. Overall, you want to make sure and choose a method that works best for you and that particular food that you are trying to preserve. So a quick overview, drying removes the moisture from the food, which slows the growth of spoilage. We've seen this for a very, very long time. I mean, dating back to even 12,000 BC in the Middle East, we saw dried foods, Romans dried fruits. The Middle Ages, we even saw still houses that they used heat to dry and smoke food. So this is a pretty age-old preservation technique. Freezing slows down spoilage by changing water into ice, which bacteria cannot use to grow easily. When we get into canning, canning kills bacteria through heating. Different canned products will need different levels of heat to kill certain bacteria, which we'll talk more about in just a few minutes. And then fermenting. So fermentation happens when good bacteria ferment the sugars and nutrients in a food to produce byproducts that preserve foods. So what kind of fermented foods have you all heard of? It's really popular right now, pretty hot in the nutrition scene. What all have you guys heard of? I know living in Fort Collins, that was one of the biggest areas of people today. Beer is one of the fermented foods. Kimchi, sauerkraut, kombucha. Very good. Shark from Iceland. I have never heard of that. That is very interesting, Scott. You always learn something at Extension. Wine, pickles. Okay. I don't encourage eating it. It would be very interesting to eat fermented shark from Iceland. All right, so we've seen, there's been evidence as far back as 12,000 years ago of, cheese, yogurt, sauerkraut, kimchi, olives, salami, jerky, bread, cider, wine, beer, coffee. Those are a lot of the fermented foods that we see and we've seen historically. All right, so we're going to jump over to the considerations you should have when figuring out which preservation method is right for you. And why I go through all of this is because you need to have this conversation with yourself if you're going to get into canning. A lot of people jump right in and they're just not quite prepared. So these are quick questions to ask yourself and kind of a how-to guide real fast. So one of the number one ways, or the first question you should ask yourself is why you're getting into food preservation. Is it the cost? Do you think it's going to cost less than buying food from the store? Are you getting into it for convenience? Do you want to just go and grab that product from a shelf or out of your freezer? Is that why you're preserving? Do you have extra produce in your garden that you want to do something with? Are you looking for added health or nutritional quality? Are you worried about the food system? I know right now I get a lot of calls with COVID going on about where food is coming from in the grocery stores. Is there going to be enough? Just a lot of questions about the food system. So I know a lot of people are getting into preservation for that reason. And then a lot of people just like to share with others. They like to make pickles or jam and give it away as a Christmas present. So those are a variety of reasons on why you would want to do it, and all of them are perfectly fine. But just ask yourself what your main goal is. A little bit about the cost is you want to think about, the produce or food and ingredients that you're going to need to preserve those items. For example, I went to purchase tomatoes the other day and they were $42 a box. So for me, I weigh out how many canned jars of tomatoes am I going to get for $42, and could I buy that at the store for a less amount, even for high-end marinara sauce. And I decided, that's not cost effective for me. I'm going to wait a little bit until the seconds come on, and we'll talk about what seconds are, but they're just not the perfect tomatoes. So think about that. Then you're going to look at the equipment and supplies, like, do you need a freezer, or do you need a pressure canner, or do you maybe just need bags and a dehydrator? Think about the fuel and water usage that you have, or you'll need, and then your time and energy that you'll put into it, because some preservation methods take quite a bit longer lengths of time to do. Here's a link here. I'll have Andrew throw that in the chat for you, but this is a great comparison of cost of preservation methods on our website that you can look more in detail at for cost comparisons. And then on this bottom tab here, there's sharing with others. And I want to give a shout out to one of our programs that we're doing statewide right now. It's the Grow and Give program. And it's a modern day victory garden. It's teaching people to garden, and then while doing so, having them grow a little bit extra to help with their neighbors or community, whether that be a food bank or a friend. But just trying to promote people growing and growing a little bit extra. So if you guys are interested in that program, then I saw that Andrew threw that in the chat. So it's a really neat program we have going on this year. A lot of great gardening and recipes and things like that. So that's kind of a fun program. All right, so we talked about why you would want to do it. Let's think about when. So we're going to determine when to do it. So determine the best time of the year. Typically in Colorado, that means the summertime. You want to preserve food when food is fresh because it maintains the quality and also preserves nutrients. So if we're trying to have a more balanced diet year round, we want to make sure and preserve those nutrients the best that we can and not lose them because we're preserving at a non-beneficial time of the year, or maybe those vegetables have sat on the shelf in the supermarket for a while. So make sure and consider that. And then think about how you're going to preserve. So you want to first decide which foods you're going to preserve. So consider the type of food you and your family would enjoy, the usefulness of the end product. So if you make 50 jars of pickles, like my husband would love me to do, when are you going to eat those? How useful is that to you? So think about that to yourself. Do you have the supplies already, or are you going to have to invest in them? Which food is going to be in abundance this year? For example, we had a late freeze, and so we lost a lot of our peach crop. So that means this year the peaches are going to be more expensive, and I may not want to preserve them this year. I may wait for another year when they're at least less expensive and just eat fresh peaches this year. So think about that. And then think about how much you can consume in 1 year. So most preserved products start losing their quality after 1 year. So you want to try to consume everything that you preserve within 1 year. All right, I'm going to bring this recipe bullet up quite a bit because I get a lot of calls asking about approved recipes after you have canned. If you're going to learn anything from this presentation, please take home this point, is follow approved recipes. Preservation only happens under certain conditions, and if these are changed, the outcome will not be preserved and it will be unsafe to consume. So preserving is not like cooking or baking where you can just add a little of this and add a little of that. It really has to happen under certain conditions with the right recipe. So you want to make sure and use up-to-date resources for preserving and approved recipes for canning. When I say approved, this means that they've been tested to ensure the finished product is preserved and will be safe to consume. And I'll show you where to find those resources and things like that in a few minutes, but I just really want to hammer that point home because it's one of the most important things when you get into canning. And I'm happy to help you. Shoot me an email, I'll find a recipe for you or a way to do it. So, Preserving food for special diets is also possible, but you need to make sure and find a recipe that is appropriate for that. Don't make modifications to your own recipes unless you've talked to an extension agent and they say it's an approved modification, because most modifications are not allowed. If you want to look up some information for yourself, the National Center for Home Food Preservation is really the gold standard for preservation recipes, and I will provide that link to you a little bit later. It's a great website to go to. It has everything from beginner steps all the way to advanced. All right. So I see we have a question from Jamie about boiling time. So we will get to adjustments for canning in just a few minutes. Great question. I'm happy you know about that. All right, so we are going to look at how do you preserve foods. So first, you start by choosing the food you'd like to preserve. That food will determine which preservation methods you can use. Once you choose a preservation method, whether it be dry, canning, freezing, or fermenting, then you'll find an approved, tested, and up-to-date recipe. Then you want to gather your supplies and ingredients. All right. So when you go to harvest your produce and you're gathering your supplies, you want to harvest in the morning and store those produce items in a cool area with good air circulation. You want to handle gently so you don't bruise or damage them. Discard damaged product and then try to use that produce within 24 hours. Remember that those enzymes keep working to deteriorate that product and can actually spoil them. If anyone wants this link, I can always send it to him later. I did not provide that to Andrew, but if you want more information on safe handling, the Grow and Give website actually has a lot of that as well. Another thing to consider is handling the produce safe while you're picking it as well as after. So make sure that you're washing with potable water, wash your hands. Don't use old paint buckets to harvest your produce in. Use something that you would want to eat out of, which would be considered food grade. You want to make sure and use clean, safe products before and after harvesting. Otherwise, you may contaminate food that's already, that would otherwise be safe to eat. So. All right, so when you select your produce, make sure it has firm texture, pleasant smelling, it's free of mold and insects. And you can also look at preserving the ugly fruits and vegetables. And this is where we get into talking about the seconds. They have different grades of fruits and vegetables, and the seconds are really nice. They may be shaped a little bit differently or maybe bigger or smaller, but those are considered ugly fruits and vegetables. And we can use those in preserving, and that's a great way of using them and for finding produce that is less expensive. Julie, for the Grow and Give stuff, let me jump back to that in just a few minutes so I don't get off topic, but I wanted to acknowledge that you had asked a question. All right, so then we're going to look at how. Oh, no, we already looked at it. Did we already look at how? Yeah, we already looked at how, sorry. All right, so those are the considerations we need to consider when we're getting into canning or preserving in general. So once we jump over into canning, remember that food starts spoiling as soon as it's picked or harvested. That spoilage can come once again because of bacteria, molds, yeast, reactions with oxygen or moisture loss. And proper canning procedures can really prevent this spoilage and preserve food by removing oxygen, destroying enzymes, destroying and preventing the growth of undesirable bacteria, yeast, and mold, and helps form a high vacuum in the jar, which keeps the air out and also microorganisms from re-entering those jars. All right. So before we jump into more, I want to know what you guys know about canning. I'm going to put that link in that we already used once, and you're going to use that same link, and it will allow you to take a quick little quiz here.
Also, Anne, did you see the question in the Q&A section? I
didn't.
It's from Scott.
Can I freeze ripe tomatoes and then can them for salsa later? Scott, that's a more in-depth question, so I might grab your email address and answer that for you. But the answer is yes, you could freeze your tomatoes and make salsa out of them later. I know a lot of people that actually make salsa and freeze it and then add the fresh ingredients later, such as like your cilantro or maybe like some of the ingredients that would wilt a little bit quicker. So I have had a lot of people do that. You know, if you were to freeze them and then can them, your salsa may not turn out the best because it would just, it'd probably get mushy. So I'm not sure it would hold together, but it depends on the consistency of salsa that you would want. Does that answer a lot of your questions, Scott? All righty, let's see how everyone's doing on that quiz. All right, so I see for the first one that it says, oops, I'm still voting, but food preservation guidelines and methods change. About 67% of you said yes, that it did. And you're correct. The food preservation methods change as science changes, so you want to make sure and use those up-to-date ones. Okay. All right, how about for the next one? You guys should be able to answer the next question now. Sorry, I'm getting used to this polling event. I apologize. Give you about 10 more seconds here, then we'll move on to the next one. So the question is, the last time major changes came out for canning was 1988. 90% of you said false. That's great. It means we're starting off at a good foot. The answer is false. We have seen a lot of canning changes since then. For example, we just saw changes from Ball or Kerr or Jarden home brands are all one and the same now, that you no longer have to preheat your lids. So that's a new change. All right, next question. A sealed jar is a safe jar. What do you guys think? All right, so we have actually about 50-50 answer on that one. So a sealed jar is a safe jar is actually false. The reason being, we'll explore more in a minute, but the bacteria inside is not killed. So just because it's sealed and can't allow new bacteria to enter, it doesn't mean that the bacteria in the jar is not has not been killed. So it could potentially grow, and we'll explore that. So that's a good item to explore for us. All right, the next one, jams and jellies do not need to be water bathed. True or false? All righty, seems like I have all of you guys. So jams and jellies do need to be water bathed. So the answer is false. They do need to be water bathed. They just have a shorter time than some of the other ones. But I know a lot of people that just invert their jars for jams and jellies. Once again, we're not killing that potential bacteria that's inside of the jars. So we want to be careful with that. All right, next one. It's okay to alter the ingredients in a recipe just a little bit. All right, so we have 84% of you said false. I think I already kind of gave you the answer to that one before, but you're correct. It's not okay to alter the ingredients just a little bit unless there are a few approved changes, but call your local extension office and we can help you with that, or shoot me an email. I'm happy. All right, all recipes found on social media blogs and from friends are okay to use. Good. Means you guys are paying attention. Right now we have almost 100% of you that say false. That's correct. Doesn't mean they're all bad, but you just need to make sure and check your sources and we'll talk about where to find those. All right, thickeners can be added to products if they're too thin. True or false? All right, so that is actually false. We had 61% of you say true and 39% false. So we will touch on that, but essentially, have you guys ever boiled a really thick pot of soup on the stove, and you know how long it takes for that center to either heat up or cool down? It's the same thing with adding thickeners. It's going to change how quickly that jar heats up throughout the whole entire jar, killing that bacteria. So your processing time wouldn't be right. So you do not want to add any sort of thickeners like cornstarch or flour or noodles or rice or anything like that to your canned products unless that's in the recipe already, which most of them would not have that in there. An approved recipe wouldn't. So yeah, that is false. You do not want to add thickeners. You also don't want to say puree something when it says chop, because that'll also change how thick it is and how easily that heat can get all the way to the center. All right, should you store your jars with the rings on? Okay, about half and half. So traditionally we did store our canning jars with the rings on, But now we know that CO2 is released from a bacteria in canned food if it's in there, and it'll pop that lid off. And so if we have the ring on there, it doesn't allow that lid to pop off, which would essentially tell us that our product is bad. But if it can't pop off, then we wouldn't know if it's bad or not. So you do not want to store your jars with rings on them anymore. All right, well, that's the end of our poll there. We pop back over to the presentation. All right, so this cute little lady gives you a recipe. Make sure and give someone a call. Find out if it's an approved recipe. Ask where she got it. Ask, you know, how old it is, things like that. You can obviously just take it too, and then do your best to vet it later on. So I help people with recipes all the time. So give me a call or email if you have questions. I'm happy to help. All right, so the bacteria we've been talking about a lot is botulism. That's one of the main bacteria that we are concerned about with canned foods. It's actually a deadly form of food poisoning. It affects your central nervous system, which is why it's so important to use approved recipes and follow them. Botulism exists as spores or vegetative cells. And so how I describe it to people is they kind of go into protection mode when they're heated just slightly. So they have to get to a really, really high temperature in order to be killed. Otherwise, they just go into this vegetative state and survive a lot of regular, like boiling water temperatures and things like that. They actually survive in soil and water for many years. And when their condition is right, like when they don't have oxygen in canned food, they can produce that deadly toxin. So ideal conditions that botulism likes are moist, low acid foods. We'll look at those more. About 40 to 120 degrees Fahrenheit and less than 2% oxygen. So once again, they're not going to grow on fresh produce because they have too much oxygen. But in canned home canned products, they will grow because there's a lack of oxygen in there. So it's kind of a perfect environment for them. So we want to make sure and kill those once we put the lids on. All right, so how do you know which one to use? I know that Corey yesterday mentioned, I was talking about water bath canning and pressure canning. He's like, wow, you just said all this stuff that I don't know anything about. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about these. And really what determines which one you'll use is the acidity of your food. So right here you have a water bath canner. It's just essentially a large pot with a rack inside of it. And then you can use another pot if you have a large pot at home, but you want that rack inside of there so the jars don't bump together. And also the rack elevates it a little bit, which allows the water to properly circulate and heat the food. Then you have a pressure canner. Now, if any of you have a pressure cooker, remember that's different. This pressure canner has a gauge on top. It has two handles on the side, which is kind of a big distinction for folks who haven't seen one before compared to a pressure cooker. And it really seals down tight. Pressure cookers are meant for cooking food like beans or chicken or things like that, but they're not meant for canning. This is a pressure canner, so there is a distinction there. And once again, which one you use is determined by the acidity of your food. The acidity can be naturally occurring or can be added, like in such foods like pickles or acidified tomatoes. And going back to the botulism, the reason we pick the pressure canner for your low acid foods is because we have to get to a higher temperature. That pressure allows us to get to that higher temperature that kills the botulism. So let's go. All right, so here is a pH scale with a lot of your food products on it. So high acid foods have a pH of 4.6 or lower, and your low acid foods have a pH value higher than 4.6. So we're really worried about the center line and down. So you can see in there that it's your meat products, your dairy products, your pumpkin, and a lot of vegetable products. Those all are low acid foods, and they would need to be pressure canned. Unless you add an acid to them like vinegar for pickling or citric acid. You can add citric acid or lemon juice. And you'll notice right here in the middle, you'll see the tomatoes, and they sit right at the line of 4.6. So we can actually process them in either direction. We can process them with a boiling water bath canner, or we can process them with a pressure canner. But if we can them in a water bath, we have to acidify them. So we can add that citric acid or the lemon juice and then follow your approved recipes on how much to do it. But that will make your pH lower than 4.6, which would allow you to water bath can them. Okay? Any questions over that? There's usually some questions about the tomato pH. All right. Oh, I see one. Okay. All right, I'll keep on going. Anyone have any questions so far on anything besides tomatoes?
We have one in the Q&A area.
Okay. Oh, can I use an Instapot to sterilize my jars and lids? You know, Scott, that might not be a bad idea. I haven't personally used an Instapot to sterilize my jars and lids, but I think as long as you keep them warm and you clean and sanitize them, then they should be fine. I know one of my colleagues is on here, Sheila. Sheila, have you ever sterilized with an Instapot? I know you can't can in them, which is on one of my next upcoming slides. I'll find out for you, Scott, and I'll also include that in my answer to you. Okay. Sheila said no, that it's pretty small for that, and I would have to agree. But if you were just doing a small batch, it might not be too bad, but it is pretty small. So, and Scott, I'll show you a trick. We are actually just about there. All right, so proper canning practices. Select your produce, find your approved recipe. Your approved recipe will tell you the proper canning procedure, whether you should use water bath or pressure canning. Your approved recipes will almost always have your elevation, adjustment for your elevation or your altitude. And then you want to process according to those directions, and then obviously store in a safe spot. I find a lot of people will store their canned products, say, in their garage or under their sink with their cleaning products. We want to store in a safe solution, or in a safe position or place as well. All right, so your recipes, we talked about those. I wanted to show you guys what an approved recipe looks like. This is a Colorado mix for vegetables. As you can see, it has the directions, it has how many pints it yields, so you know how many jars you need to get ready. It has the directions on how to process it. And then at the bottom here, you can also see that it has the elevation adjustments. We'll talk about exactly what that means, but your approved recipes should note that for you. And if they don't, it may or may not be an approved recipe. And regardless if it has it or not, you have to do it in order to properly process, unless you are living at sea level. All right, so finding recipes. I'll have Andrew stick this in the chat, but it is a list of places you can find recipes. Any of the state extension offices, regardless of the state, will all have canning recipes. Ours is listed on there. We also have a great app that you can download that will help you find recipes. The National Center for Home Food Preservation has some great recipes on there. The USDA has a complete guide to home canning that's awesome, step by step. They also have frequently asked questions, which is nice, as well as the National Center for Home Food Preservation has those frequently asked questions, or like problem solvers, like my pickles aren't crisp enough, or things like that. The So Easy to Preserve book, which is what I really like. Here's it right here. You know, I like finding a lot of my baking and cooking recipes online, but for canning, I really like having a physical book. This is actually put out by the University of Georgia Extension and the National Center for Home Food Preservation together. So it's a great resource. And I know your local extension offices can get it for you, but I also think it's probably available online on Amazon or things like that. You have your Ball Blue Book. That's a great one. Anything from Ball is typically an approved recipe. And then the So Easy to Preserve book, also they have a website and they have a YouTube channel. So that's been kind of fun for me to explore and find out. All right, so those are where you find your recipes. Once you find your recipes, Then we're going to talk about your elevation adjustment. So like I said, all of your recipes are going to be made for sea level. So once again, when you get down to sea level, our water boils at a different temperature here in Colorado than at sea level. So we have to account for that. For water bath canning, you're going to adjust the length of time that you can for. For pressure canning, you're going to adjust the amount of pressure you can for. Get a lot of questions if you have to adjust the amount of time for a pressure canner, and you don't. You have to adjust the pressure for a pressure canner. Okay, so if we look at our water, boiling point of our water as we increase in elevation, you can see at sea level it boils at 212. I think here we boil at 185 or something like that. Oh, that must not be right, because that would mean I'm at 9,000 feet. But we boil at a lower temperature, so we have to account for the length of time that we process our products for. And that's why we have to do it. A lot of people don't want to add the extra time, or just don't have time to do it. So that is something that will add extra time and cost to your canning process. So we should not depend on mothers and grandmas' canning books. Correct, Linda. Science has changed, and those are hard because, you want to recreate the recipes that your grandma or your grandmother had. And unfortunately, a lot of those recipes just are not approved anymore. They have changed the technology. We now have the ability to measure the products and know that they're unsafe. And some food products, the pHs of tomatoes I know has changed. So yeah, you don't want to use those. But if you have a recipe, let me know, and I'm happy to look and see if I can find an approved one. I can usually find an approved one. And I'm going to add in the chat a little, let's see, a little handy link or Google search engine technique I use. So say I was looking for apricot jam. You type the recipe and what you're looking for, and then you do the site :edu, and that will bring up only edu sites, which is really handy. You still need to make sure that they are extension sites, but if you do it that way, when you're on the internet, you can kind of limit your searches down. It's not a perfect way, but it definitely is helpful if you're trying to recreate an heirloom recipe and you're trying to look for something that's similar. So that's a nice way of searching all of the edu sites for recipes. So, and I'm always happy to help, like I said. Okay. So storing, once again, store in an area without temperature fluctuations. You don't want to store in your garage, things like that. Store in an area between 50 and 70 degrees, away from cleaning and toxic products, away from animals and pests, and without the rings on. Some of the unapproved methods are open kettle, oven, microwave, dishwasher canning, crock pot canning, steam canning, inverting your jars, so turning them upside down so they seal. Remember, it's not going to kill the bacteria inside of the jar. It's just going to make it so new bacteria can't enter. Instapots, they are being researched, but they're currently not approved. Canning powders, aspirin, click-top screw lids or reusable lids, paraffin wax, outdated materials, and using jars that are not meant for canning. Some of the tips I have for you is, adjust for your altitude every time. Like I said, with water bath, adjust for the length of time. With pressure canning, adjust the amount of pressure. If you think a canned product is bad, do not smell it or taste it. Once again, botulism, a lot of times you can't smell or taste. So do not taste a little bit and expect to have a different, get a different taste than what you normally would, because you can't see it, smell it, or taste it most of the time. Sometimes you can see bubbles and stuff, and also don't feed it to your pets. It's just as toxic to them as it is to us. And then if a lid is not sealed, the product is considered unsafe unless you can reprocess it within 24 hours of when you originally processed it. And if you have questions like that, give us a call. We get a variety of questions of, if I did this, then what type of things. So, all right, so I want to show you guys what water bath canning looks like. Water bath canning, remember, is used for high acid foods. So these are your fruits, pickles, some tomatoes if they're acidified, jelly jams, things like that. So I'm going to share my screen real fast. Let's see. Yeah. Oh, that's the intro. Yes. Okay, here.
During the boiling water canning process, heat is transferred into the liquid and food in the jars by the boiling water. Place the rack in the bottom of the canner. Don't let the jars touch the bottom of the canner. Fill the canner at least 1/2 full, depending on how many jars you will be processing. For fewer jars, you'll need more water. Bring the water to a simmer, or 180 degrees Fahrenheit for hot pack foods, or to 140 degrees Fahrenheit for raw pack foods. The water should not be boiling. After jars are filled and rings adjusted, use a jar lifter to place jars onto the canning rack. Keep jars upright at all times. Space the jars evenly around the inside of the canner. Add or remove hot water to place water level at 1 to 2 inches above the jars. If more hot water is needed, pour the water around the jars, not on them. Turn your burner to the highest setting. Cover the canner. Start your timer when the water reaches a rolling boil. The water should never stop boiling during the processing time. Keep the water level and temperature constant. Have a small pot of extra boiling water handy. If more water is needed during the process, add it around the jars, not directly on top of them. Process for the full time required by the recipe. At the end of the process time, turn off the heat and take the lid off the canner, tilting it away from your face to prevent steam burns. Wait 5 minutes.
So that's a quick overview of what the boiling water process really looks like. We can go over it a little bit more in depth. Oh, sorry, Sheila, you guys lost the sound. Okay, we're going to go over it in more depth. Can you guys hear me now? Okay. All right, so we'll go over that whole video in more depth. I just wanted to give you a quick overview. So when you're looking at gathering your supplies for water bath canning, you're going to obviously need your water bath canner, glass preserving jars, lids, and bands, common kitchen utensils such as wooden spoons, ladle, and paring knife, and then quality ingredients that are fresh. You're also going to want a home canning funnel or any funnel that's big enough for the food to pass through, a bubble freer and headspace tool, or a measuring tape and a rubber spatula would work fine too. And then proper cooking service. You cannot can, unfortunately, on glass top stoves. So if you think you can on your glass top, go ahead and check your manufacturer's instructions, but most glass tops I've seen cannot either support the weight or don't heat properly. So check out your manufacturer's instructions on that. And then obviously you need your approved recipe. So this is a jar lifter. This will lift the jars in and out of the boiling water pot. That is probably the one thing besides the canner that I would recommend everyone getting. A lot of the other supplies we can kind of make shift from other things, but I think that's one of the most important. Then you're going to need the funnel, like I talked about. This is a bubble remover and headspace tool. The little 90-degree bends in it actually will show you whether it's a 1/2 inch headspace or less or more. And then on the other side, you can use the other end of it to remove any bubbles from your canned products. I grew up knowing that I should always use closed-toed shoes, pants, long sleeve shirts when I'm canning, because sometimes you'll drop a jar or you'll pull it out of the canner and it'll shatter from the difference of heat. So always make sure and protect yourself from that hot liquid and lift the jars away from your body. It's a really easy thing to forget as you're getting into canning, especially once you start feeling comfortable, and you'll be reminded, unfortunately. So these are the lids. This is what the lids should look like. They should be the metal lid with a rubber sealing component on the back. You have your ball jars like this, or other canning jars. There's other brands as well. Once again, your long sleeve shirt for protection. Towels, and probably towels that you're ready to probably get rid of. They will probably get stained or get really sticky stuff on them. So I kind of use my old kitchen towels for it, and I'll put those down on the counter and then put a cookie drying rack on top of them. The jars, when you pull them out, especially like a lot of your fruit products, they will bubble over a little bit, and you'll get that sticky surface or sticky material all over your countertops and things like that. So this really, really helps. Then obviously your canner, and I like having a cookie rack. So we remodeled our kitchen, so I think my husband would die if I put a hot jar on top of our new countertop. So that's the way I get around it, and I haven't had a thermal shock the jars enough to break any of them. So want to touch a little bit more about the lids because everyone has questions about these. But it's once again that metal lid with the sealing component on the back side. It almost looks like a rubber component. And Ball actually just made theirs so you no longer have to heat them prior to putting them on your jar. Before you had to heat them in order to kind of loosen up that rubber part. And then you have your metal screw band lid that will hold this lid onto the jar while you're processing it and while it's cooling. Remember, after those 24 hours, you will take this metal screw band off. And I always keep a couple in my drawer. So, you know, when you take something out of your pantry, you open up that metal lid, you always want to have something to put on top of it to say put it back in your fridge if you're not going to finish the whole jar in one setting. Or if you're taking it to a friend's house, those metal bands become in handy so they accidentally don't open in your car or things like that. So I keep a couple of those handy, but don't store them on them. Okay. All right, so the first steps are you fill your water bath canner with at least half full of water, and you'll want to start that water simmering. You want to cover and simmer until the jars are filled and placed in the canner. You also want to check your jars, lids, and bands. Check your jars for cracks, nicks, and chips. Anything that would cause it to break or not seal properly is considered a defect, and you don't want to use those jars for canning. Your bands should fit on the jars, and then wash all your jars in a hot and soapy water and dry well. What I actually do is I actually put mine through the dishwasher. I clean my dishwasher first. I run it on a clean cycle and sanitize it. And then I will put my canning jars in there and wash them. Make sure, you know, get off any dust or whatever was on them. And it also preheats them for me filling them. So it's kind of a double do, and for me, that's really nice. And then I just leave my dishwasher closed and I'm ready to fill them. So I like doing it that way. So maybe, Scott, that'll help you instead of preheating and sterilizing them in your Instapot. So why can't you store them with the metal band on? Julie, you can't store them with the metal band on because botulism releases CO2 when it's produced inside of a jar. And so it will actually pop that lid off if the jar is contaminated. So when we keep that band on there, it's creating kind of an artificial seal. It's pushing that lid down when sometimes we want it to pop off. Whereas if there's nothing growing in the jar, it's safe. You know, it had a good seal. There's no food on it that would allow bacteria to go back and forth. It's going to be just fine, and it won't pop off. But if there's for some reason an issue with it, you'll know because that band won't create an artificial seal, essentially. All right, so then you want to preheat your canning jars or do them in the dishwasher, that's fine. And keeping the jars hot really prevents that thermal shock of taking a cold jar and adding hot product to it and then putting in a hot water bath. So you want to try to ease into that a little bit. Then you want to prepare your desired recipe for your high acid foods. Remember, water bath is for high acid foods. And since we are running a touch short on time and my videos don't seem to be working, this video just showed you essentially what I just told you. So we will skip those. All right, step 5. You can use the jar lifter to remove the preheated jars and fill them with the jar funnel, leaving the headspace recommended in the recipe. Every recipe will tell you what headspace or how much headspace to leave, and just follow that to the T. Then you're going to want to remove any air bubbles by sliding either a spatula around or that bubble remover around, and just get any of that trapped air out of there. So repeat that a couple times and then recheck your headspace to make sure it's a proper amount. and that's one of those funnels that's kind of a wider funnel. So you can see you can probably use a household funnel, and that's fine, or you can try to do it without, but you'll just have a lot more cleaning to do. So I try to tell people the essential tools you have to have, and then the ones that are nice to have. All right, so there's that jar lifter, holding that jar in and out, and that, like I said, those are one of the things I would consider essential. So after you fill the jars, you want to wipe the rim and the threads of the jar clean and free of debris. Once again, that sealing compound needs a nice, clean, flat surface to seal onto. You don't want to have any food residue on there or your product may mold. Center the lid on the jar, and then I always tell people to use like your middle finger and your thumb, and you're going to screw that lid on just to snug. They call it finger tight, and that really ensures that you're not cranking it down with your whole hand. That has its own set of problems with it. So you just want to tighten those rings down to finger tight, and then once they're tight, or once they're on there, when you pull them out of the water bath, don't retighten them. So they're kind of done for once you already process them. And then you're going to place those filled jars into your water bath canner and make sure that the water covers them 1 to 2 inches. Place your lid on your water bath canner and rebring to a boil. Once it starts reboiling, that's when you start your processing time. So when you look at your recipe, it'll have the processing time. You'll adjust for your elevation, and then you'll start your timer when the water starts to reboil. If at any point your water stops boiling, you have to restart your time. Donna, good question. I have a slide on specifically on headspace, so we will get there. Good question though. So you want to process in that boiling water bath for the time indicated, and then turn off the heat and remove the pot lid. Let it stand for 5 minutes just to cool down a little bit, and then remove the jars and put them on a towel, or like I said, I put the towel down and then the cookie sheet on top of it and my jars on top of it. So if there's spills or things like that, it doesn't get everywhere. You also want to set them upright. You don't need to invert them or turn them around or anything, and pull them out of the canner pretty far away from you. Like I said, sometimes it will have that thermal shock, and it could fall, the bottom could fall off, or when it happens to me though, it typically happens when I'm still over the pot. Like it happens pretty instantaneously. But just make sure that hot product stays away from you. Leave the jars undisturbed for 12 to 24 hours. Then you can take the rings off, label them with the date you made it and the product that it is, and you can store it in your appropriate spot. One of the things I really like is I either write on the lid, or sometimes that kind of wipes off. So I really like these dissolvable labels that I think Ball came out with them, but those are really nice, and I haven't had a problem with them like dissolving in my dishwasher or anything. So that's something to kind of check out that I found to be a handy new product. Oh, I skipped this spot. I'm sorry. Once you take those rings off, you're going to want to make sure your lid is actually sealed. So you're going to push down on it, and as long as there's no flex in the lid, then you're okay. Let's go and make this picture a little bit bigger. So you can press down in the center of the lid with a finger or a thumb, and make sure that there's this concaveness to the lid there. So that's always satisfying. I was going to play you guys a video about the lids going pop, because as a canner, that's one of the most satisfying sounds. It's like, yes, I'm done with this really long process. And the lid pops, you know you did it right, you processed it for the right time, and you got that high vacuum seal. So you know your product is going to last you for at least that year. All right, so Donna asked about headspace, and that's actually exactly what we were going to talk about. So your headspace is here. It's between, you'll have your product, and then you'll have the liquid in your product, and it's the space between the top level of that product and the lid. It's really important because that food, as it's boiling and processing, it will expand, and you just want to make sure, and it depends on the product, but you'll have a variety of issues if you don't allow that headspace to be there. So, and I can answer, I'll send you some information, Donna, if you send Andrew your email. So, okay. So I think that's where I should probably stop, so we have time for questions. What questions do you guys have? Did I not cover anything that you guys are interested in, or something I need to go over in more detail? You guys can write in the chat. Give everyone just a second here. All right, well, if you guys don't mind heading on over, oh, sorry, I didn't see yours, Alicia. Let me see. Oh, Annika. Is a pressure canner method the same as water bath canning? It is, it's similar in how you prepare the product, that's for sure, and how you put on the rings and everything like that. There are some additional steps that you have to take in order to properly like vent the canner and things like that, and how that beginning processing part works. But the timing that you're going to use, the recipes where you find them is going to be the same. How you fill your jars will all be the same. You just have a few extra steps for the pressure canner, and I can send you a step-by-step how-to guide if you send Andrew your email. Too little headspace is bad. What about too much? Yes. So Jay, I can't see your last name, but yeah, you don't want too much oxygen in your canned product. It'll cause them to decolor, and if you process it right and you lost some water, then that's okay, but you want to try to decrease that oxygen as much as you can in there, so you don't get that deterioration from it. Do you run the dishwasher to get your jars ready to use soap, or just the hot cycle? Oh, hold on, you're scanning too fast. Do you run the dishwasher to get jars ready to use soap, or just the hot cycle? I run it as like a normal dishwasher cycle, Kara. But if you pre-clean your jars, then I guess you could. Mine just tend to have a little bit of dust on them, so I want to have them be cleaned as well as warm. What is the easiest product to start for canning? You know, probably I would start with jams and jellies, Julie. Those are really easy. If you mess up on them, then you'll have a great syrup, which is great for pancakes or ice cream, things like that. But that's a nice introduction for canning, and I'm happy to send you recipes. I will have Andrew throw in, or actually I'll throw in my contact information real quick. I will also I'll also give you guys our Facebook page, or my Facebook page. I've been doing Lunch and Learn canning series on there. So if you guys want to join again, and some of this information that we talked about today is actually on there. So if you have questions that I don't get to today, or you need recipes, just feel free to contact me. Oh, thank you, Andrew. I have old recipes that our family loves, but there probably needs to be changes. So Sherry, go ahead and send those to me. I'm happy to take a look at them. I can't guarantee I can find the exact one. And since those recipes have to be approved and tested over and over again, I can't like approve specific changes for recipes, but I can try to find a recipe that's very similar to the one you have. Because I understand that that's hard to not use those. So if I understand correctly, if I add a different spice and Todd, it depends. It'll depend on what you're adding, what your original recipe was. There are some easy approved changes, like you can change the hotness of a pepper in, say, a salsa recipe, but you cannot change the amount of the pepper. So there are some changes like that. So Todd, if you have an example and you want to email that to me and see if you can change something out in a recipe, then I'll take a look at that for you. A lot of these are unfortunately a case-by-case basis. Just really depends on the recipe and what's in it and what change you're wanting to make. All right. Will your presentation notes be available? I'm working on that with Corey. This is the first time I've been using Prezi to present, so I'm trying to figure out how to get those to Corey in a way that you guys can receive them. So I'm going to try, Kara, but if there's a specific question, like I said, just email me.
Also, Kara, we're recording this session too, so we will have this on the CSU Alumni Association YouTube channel, And I believe CSU Extension will probably also put it on their webpage too.
Yes, and we also have, like I said, on my Facebook page, I've been doing little 10-minute lunch and learns. And so if those are helpful as well, those are there and available. So yes, Julie, you can half the recipe. That'd be fine. Just don't change the ingredients. You'll just have half the jars. All right. Well, if you guys don't mind, I would love some feedback on today's event. I'll send you that link to that polling website again. There'll be 2 questions. I'll have the first one available, and then maybe a couple minutes later, I will add in the second one. I'll give you guys a chance to answer those, but I'd love your honest feedback. That's how I become better at instructing these classes. And in this class particular, you know, it's a unique online presentation that I haven't done before. So if I can help you guys with anything, or we can be a resource, just know that we're happy to help. That's what we're here for.